there. He practiced law in Jamestown over
personal income tax in the fall.
All the distinguished people here who either knew Justice Jackson or were related to him or had been exposed to him in this town all these years, and I wondered what I could possibly say. But it's really an extreme honor for me. When he told me, I was kind of reminded of what Jack Benny said one time when he received an honor. He said, "I really don't deserve this, but I have arthritis and I don't deserve that either." I have pictures of 5 personal heroes hanging in my chambers at the court. These are 5 individuals who personify excellence. They include Abraham Lincoln, Lou Gehrig, my constitutional law professor Charles Allen Wright, legendary District Attorney Henry Wade of Roe v. Wade fame, and the prosecutor of Jack Ruby, the District Attorney there for 36 years, and Robert H. Jackson. To me, Robert Jackson represents the very best that the bench and bar have to offer. And I'm telling you a lot. I'm reprising my Jackson lecture, but a lot of this I'm sure that you all know. He was born in Pennsylvania in 1892, but moved here to Chautauqua County when he was 5 years old, graduated from high school in 1910, and took a 1-year graduate course at Jamestown High School. Right after that, started a 3-year clerkship in a law office, and in the next year, 1911, he entered Albany Law School and finished the 2-year course in 1 year, was licensed to practice. Well, he came back to Jamestown, finished his clerkship, took the New York bar examination, and was admitted to practice in 1913 at the age of 21. So that's a great achievement just right there. He practiced law in Jamestown over 20 years and was very successful. By all accounts, he was a complete general practitioner. He was tough, brilliant, hard-working. He was a leader of the bar, serving as president of his local bar association, and later as chairman of what later became the ABA House of Delegates. That was while he was still here in Jamestown. A friend later said of him, "Robert Jackson represented the advocate at his best. He possessed the rare combination of a good jury personality and the qualities of a profound lawyer. He knew how to talk persuasively to a jury of Chautauqua County farmers, yet he could argue the points of law involved in the case with great learning and with unanswerable logic, either before the trial judge or an appellate court. He had high standards of craftsmanship as a lawyer. He was thorough and painstaking in preparation." In 1930, while he was still here in Jamestown, Jackson was proposed for membership in the prestigious American Law Institute. In the membership committee meeting, then Chief Judge Cardozo supported his election. When the time came to vote on Jackson, a committee member said, "Who is Jackson? I've never heard of him." Cardozo replied, "You will in time." In 1934, Jackson joined the Roosevelt administration as general counsel for the Internal Revenue Service. Roosevelt successively appointed him Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Department of Justice Tax Division and Attorney General in charge of the Antitrust Division. He performed each assigned task efficiently and professionally, quickly earning the reputation as the administration's best lawyer. In 1938, Roosevelt appointed Jackson Solicitor General, and he performed the job so admirably, Justice Brandeis remarked that he should be Solicitor General for life. In 1940, Roosevelt appointed Jackson Attorney General. One of his colleagues in the Justice Department later said, "As Attorney General, Solicitor General, and Assistant Attorney General, he lost but a single case in the Supreme Court. Against that may be tallied some 27 arguments that he won." In April of that year, Jackson addressed the second annual conference of United States attorneys. He told them, "Nothing better can come out of this meeting of law enforcement officers than a rededication to the spirit of fair play and decency that should animate the federal prosecutor. Your positions are of such independence and importance that while you're being diligent, strict, and vigorous in law enforcement, you can also afford to be just. Although the government technically loses its case, it is really won if justice has been done. The qualities of a good prosecutor are as elusive and as impossible to define as those which mark a gentleman. And those who need to be told would not understand it anyway. A sensitiveness to fair play and sportsmanship is perhaps the best protection against the abuse of power. And the citizen's safety lies in the prosecutor who tempers zeal with human kindness, who seeks truth and not victims, who serves the law and not factional purposes, and who approaches his task with humility. On June the 12th, 1941, President Roosevelt appointed Robert Jackson as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. He served there until his death in 1954. A leading constitutional scholar summarized his judicial career in these words: "Nature had given him a bright, strong mind. It was one of the best 3 or 4, possibly 5, of the court during his years of service. It was a disciplined mind, self-disciplined, and sharpened by the varied incidents of a general practice. He had attended no college. His engaging style, his easy acquaintance with good literature, he had acquired for himself. Even in his 1 year of law school, his training had been in practical subjects taught by practical men. The assurance and courage that comes from professional mastery, that too he had won for himself. So he became an exemplar of the best virtues we attribute to our tough common law system. A good judge should feel responsible for the practicality of his judgments. He displayed, too, a constant concern that the court's pronouncement convey to the practitioner a workable rule of conduct. To his fingertips, he retained a feel for private practice. This was the American lawyer at his best, when what he made of himself is an inspiration and a challenge to all who follow his calling." In describing the judicial office, Jackson wrote, "Something happens to a man when he puts on a judicial robe, and I think it ought to. The change is very great and requires psychological change within a man to get into an attitude of deciding other people's controversies instead of waging them. It really calls for quite a changed attitude. Some never make it, and I'm not sure I am." He also wrote, "When we went to law school, or when we went to school, we were told that we were governed by laws, not men. As a result of that, many people think that there's no need to pay any attention to judicial candidates because judges merely apply the law by some mathematical formula, and a good judge and a bad judge all apply the same kind of law. The fact is that the most important part of a judge's work is the exercise of judgment, and that the law in a court is never better than the common sense judgment of the law that is presiding, the judge that is presiding." In his book, The Supreme Court and the American System of Government, Jackson wrote shortly before his death, "My philosophy has been and continues to be that the court cannot and should not try to seize the initiative in shaping the policy of the law, either by constitutional interpretation or by statutory construction. While the line to be drawn between interpretation and legislation is difficult, and numerous dissents turn upon it, there is a limit beyond which the court incurs the just charge of trying to supersede the lawmaking branches. Every justice has been accused of legislating, and everyone has joined in that accusation of others. When the court has gone too far, it has provoked reactions that have set back the cause it is designed to advance, and has sometimes called down upon it severe rebuke." Jackson believed strongly in judicial restraint and looked askance at attempts to determine legislative intent. In this respect, he was a precursor of Scalia, Thomas, Easterbrook, and Posner. Listen to his words. Don't they sound familiar? "It is only the words of the bill that have been given presidential approval where that approval is given. It is not to be supposed that in signing a bill, the president endorses the whole congressional record. I should concur in this result more readily if the court could reach it by analysis of the statute instead of by psychoanalysis of Congress. When we decide from legislative history, including statements of witnesses at hearings, what Congress probably had in mind, we must put ourselves in the place of a majority of congressmen and act according to the impression we think this history should have made on them. Not having been a congressman, I am handicapped in that weird endeavor. This process seems to me not interpretation of a statute, but creation of a statute. Jackson's writing style was unique. His colleague Felix Frankfurter said of him, "To an unusual degree in the history of the court, Justice Jackson wrote as he felt. In his case, the style was the man. He wrote as he talked, and he talked as he felt. The fact that his opinions were written talk made them as lively as the liveliness of his talk. He had impish candor, to borrow one of his own phrases. Candor, indeed, was one of his deepest veins. There was nothing stuffy about him, and therefore nothing stuffy about his writing. No man who ever sat on the Supreme Court, it seems to me, mirrored the man in him in his judicial work more completely than did Justice Jackson. His speech breaks through the printed page. He was one of those rare men whose spoken word survives in type." Another friend said that he had a reservoir of learning from which he drew gracefully and effortlessly. But the most marked quality of his judicial and non-judicial writing was not the ability to borrow an apt quotation or to find an idea well expressed by one who had written before him. It was the ability to think brilliantly in original and bold fashion and to express his thoughts in forceful and eloquent English of a style inimitably his own. His writing was pithy and pungent, yet he never sacrificed clarity of thought for a well-turned phrase. He was a master of the paradox. He had a great love of alliteration, and his antithetical statements were gems. Yet his wit never descended to the frivolous. It always added a barb to the telling point. His wit was especially telling when turned upon himself or his court. Examples of his wit abound. In a 1951 ABA Journal article about Supreme Court advocacy, he said, "I used to say that as Attorney General, I made 3 arguments in every case. First came the one I had planned, as I thought logical, coherent, complete. Second was the one actually presented, interrupted, incoherent, disjointed, disappointing. The third was an utterly devastating argument that I thought of after going to bed that night." He went on to say, "On your first appearance before the court, do not waste your time and ours telling us so. We are likely to discover for ourselves that you are a novice, but will think nonetheless of you for it. Every famous lawyer has had his first day at our bar, and perhaps a sad one. Be respectful, of course, but also be self-respectful, and neither disparage yourselves nor flatter the justices. We think well enough of ourselves already." In the 1953 case of Brown versus Allen, Jackson said, "Reversal by a higher court is not proof that justice is thereby better done. There is no doubt that if there were a super Supreme Court, a substantial proportion of our reversals of state courts would also be reversed. We are not fallible, and we're not final because we're infallible, but we are infallible only because we are final." Jackson's exasperation was quite apparent in the 1947 case of SEC versus Chenery Corporation, when he wrote in dissent that, "The court's reasoning adds up to this: the commission must be sustained because of its accumulated experience in solving a problem with which it has never before been confronted." I give up. Now I realize fully what Mark Twain meant when he said, "The more you explain it, the more I don't understand." With charming candor, Jackson freely admitted his mistakes. In Massachusetts versus United States, he wrote, "Under these circumstances, except for any personal humiliation involved in admitting that I do not always understand the opinions of this court, I can see no reason why I should be consciously wrong today because I was unconsciously wrong yesterday." Again, in writing about one of his own Attorney General's opinions that he believes should be overruled, he said in a concurring opinion, "I am entitled to say of that opinion what any discriminating reader must think of it. It was as foggy as the statute the Attorney General was asked to interpret." Then quoting Lord Westbury, he wrote, "I can only say that I am amazed that a man of my intelligence should have been guilty of giving such an opinion." Professor Charles Allen Wright believed that Justice Jackson's dissent in the 1944 case of Korematsu versus United States was the most eloquent judicial statement ever made describing American democracy. Jackson wrote, "Korematsu was born on our soil of parents born in Japan. The Constitution makes him a citizen of the United States by nativity and a citizen of California by residence. No claim is made that he is not loyal to this country. There is no suggestion that apart from the matter involved here, he is not law-abiding and well-disposed. Korematsu, however, has been convicted of an act not commonly a crime. It consists merely of being present in the state whereof he is a citizen, near the place where he was born, and where all his life he has lived. A citizen's presence in this locality, however, was made a crime only if his parents were of Japanese birth. Had Korematsu been one of four, the others being, say, a German alien enemy, an Italian alien enemy, and a citizen of American-born ancestors convicted of treason but on parole, only Korematsu's presence would have violated the order. The difference between their innocence and his crime would result not from anything he did, said, or thought different than they, but only because he was born of different racial stock. Now, if any fundamental assumption underlies our system, it is that guilt is personal and not inheritable. Even if all of one's antecedents had been convicted of treason, the Constitution prohibits its penalties from being visited upon him. But here is an attempt to make an otherwise innocent act a crime, merely because this prisoner is the son of parents as to whom he had no choice, and belongs to a race from which there's no way to resign. If Congress, in peacetime legislation, should enact such criminal law, I should suppose this court would refuse to enforce it. Justice Jackson correctly predicted that if he were to be remembered by posterity, it would be for his writing and for his service as the chief American prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials. As you already know, in 1945 and 1946, at the request of President Truman, Jackson took a leave of absence from the court to serve in that capacity. The major participants all agreed that Jackson was the guiding force behind the organization and implementation of the trials, and that his performance was masterful. In his opening address before the International Military Tribunal, Jackson said, "The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world involves a great responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. That four great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hands of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason." In March of 1954, Justice Jackson suffered a heart attack. His doctors told him that if he reduced his work activities, he could live a relatively long life. But he left the hospital on May the 17th and went directly to court so that the entire Supreme Court could be present when Chief Justice Warren announced the unanimous decision in Brown v. Board of Education. He soon returned to his rigorous work schedule. On October the 9th, 1954, a second heart attack killed him. He was 62 years old. In a memorial tribute in the Columbia Law Review, Justice Frankfurter wrote, "Self-reliance, good-humored tolerance, recognition of the other fellow's right to be and to thrive, even though you may not think he's as good as you are, suspicion of authority as well as awareness of its need, disdain of arrogance and self-righteousness, a preference for truculent independence over prudent deference and conformity, these were the feelings that shaped his outlook on life. He liked his kind without being sentimental about it. He was gregarious but shy about intimacies." In the same Columbia Law Review issue, one of his former Justice Department colleagues wrote, "He had a quiet courage which never led to a bellow of defiance, but which permitted him to take in any instance the action he thought best without discernible thought of criticism or personal injury. He was modest in manner, yet supremely confident of himself and his judgment. He had a calm which no crisis could disturb, and standards of honorable conduct which were both rigorous and unshakable." Possibly the best description of Robert H. Jackson is found in his own words, his 1944 tribute to country lawyers in the ABA Journal. "The vanishing country lawyer left his mark on his times, and he was worth knowing. He read law in the commentaries of Blackstone and Kent, and not by the case system. He did not specialize, nor did he pick and choose his clients. He rarely declined service to worthy ones because of inability to pay. Once enlisted for a client, he took his obligations seriously. He insisted on complete control of the litigation. He was no mere hired hand, but he gave every power and resource to the cause. He identified himself with his client's cause, sometimes too fully. He would fight the adverse party and fight his counsel, fight every hostile witness and fight the court, fight public sentiments, fight any obstacle to his client's success. He never quit. He moved for new trials, he appealed, and if he lost out in the end, he joined the client at the tavern in damning the judge, which is the last right in closing an unsuccessful case, and I have officiated at many. He loved his profession. He had a real sense of dedication to the administration of justice. He held his head high as a lawyer. He rendered and exacted courtesy, honor, and straightforwardness at the bar. He respected the judicial office deeply, demanded the highest standards of competence and disinterestedness and dignity, despised all political use or trifling with judicial power, and had an affectionate regard for every man who fulfilled the exacting prescription of the just judge. The law to him was like a religion, and its practice was more than a means of support, it was a mission. He was not always popular in his community, but he was respected. Unpopular minorities and individuals often found in him their only mediator and advocate. He was too independent to court the populace. He thought of himself as a leader and lawgiver, not a mouthpiece. Often his name was, in a generation or two, forgotten. It was from this brotherhood that America has drawn its statesmen and judges. A free and self-governing republic stands as a monument for the little known and unremembered, as well as for the famous men of our profession. Well, Robert Jackson was a famous man of our profession. Indeed, he was the consummate professional. His splendid example makes me proud to be a lawyer and a judge. In the words of Professor Charles Fairman, he will live in the living law of the Constitution.
Thank you.
Now you can see why he was selected the 2002 Robert H. Jackson Lecturer.
Renewed with hope, grateful for lives fully lived, inspired to be keepers of justice. Amen.